In this video, I want to talk to you about the 3 tips you can use to improve at Yu-Gi-Oh!, hone your craft and master the rules of the game, and you're going to win a lot more duels because these are kind of the fundamentals of the game. I think it's going to make you an even better duelist because now you can use the rest of your brain to actually develop what kind of combo you should do or how you should break the board. Let's get into it. In this first tip, we're talking about hand traps, the use of them, what hand traps you should be picking up right now, what hand traps have fallen off but maybe have come back. And I think there's a really exciting discussion because we get to talk about some of your favorite cards and why they're good right now. Definitely make sure to catch my hand trap tier list as well for an overall breakdown of all the hand traps in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now that are actually performing really well, and also my meta deck counter guide so you know which decks to beat and how to beat them. Isn't it funny how some hand traps lose complete favor and everyone disses them, and then when they come back to the meta no one says anything? Right now, Droll is the killer, the Kashtira killer. It's also the adventure killer, and if you notice, many versions of Sprite which are doing really well are running the adventure engine. So it's very interesting to see how Droll has become a main deck card, and if you played the YCS 250th, you may have noticed it in a lot of main decks now, and I too experienced that when I played Scarecrow Adventure. I think Droll is a good example of a broken hand trap that's now super popular and super relevant. Do you anticipate a lot of searcher cards coming in the next meta, in the next archetype? That means Droll is going to be good. Also, another card that took over the YCS 250th is Cyframe Gamma. I'm so surprised at how strong this card really was, but when I look at it, when I think about it, Gamma is actually amazing into the Kashtira matchup and against Kashtira, because when Arise has to always activate its effect, you have a free Gamma and a free trigger for Gamma. So what I advise you is to look at every single hand trap in the game and critique it against every single archetype that's relevant right now, and then looking at the other hand traps like Nibiru, for example. Nibiru was not good in the tier element Sprite format because Sprite would lock you out of anything that's not level 2 linked to rank 2, and the tournament would have Rule Callus on the field before the 5th summon. As soon as Kashtira released, it became super popular, and it's really interesting how these hand traps fluctuate the meta, so you can get a glimpse of which ones are obviously good and why you should play them, but also see how they're going to change the meta, how they'll dictate the rest of the meta. Board breakers are also considered staples in a way, and I've seen the impact of evenly matched now in the main deck, and when they go second, when they draw as the 6th card, some of the craziest interaction we've ever seen. So I can see why certain cards are becoming staples. If you can have all the best board breakers, all the best staples and hand traps onto one board and compare it to all the archetypes, I think you're going to see something really interesting where you really get to find out which ones stick out and which one's actually the best. Some of the staple cards we're seeing the rise of is Lightning Storm against the back row decks. That makes for a great board removal card that's not really complicated to use, and I think it's becoming the new staple of the modern format. Infinite Permanence to beat pretty much every deck in the game, and it can stop a lot of Kashtira combos, it can stop branded combos, and then of course Ash Blossom, which is a great hit to the branded fusion, and it can hit the incredible pot cards like the Pot Prosperity and the Pot of Desires. So these are 2 of the best hand traps at the moment. Keep a lookout for other content creators and their videos to help you break down the meta. GGYGO has a great series where he breaks down every hand trap and how it affects each deck in the meta. So these are great tools you can use to improve at the game. Sometimes the brand expulsion, Gimme Puppet, Nightmare Lock is just too strong to beat. So we can see how Godspell has become a staple, you could say, and I think you can apply that to any other hand trap, any other board breaker, and figure out which one hits the most things, or maybe the archetype you play is inherently weak to something else. I can see that being a really good contender for what you decide to play, and I think that just goes to show how some amazing cards completely fall off as a chain reaction to something else in the meta existing. So when you're considering staples to pick up for the next meta, when you're considering staples in your deck building, definitely make sure you keep an eye out for those game-changing cards that really fluctuate the meta by themselves. Critiquing your deck building and not having to always net deck. So before I go on, I will say this right now, I think net decking is a great tool you can use to figure out the skeleton of a deck. What I like to do is sometimes see what the winning deck lists are for that archetype, try and understand it from your own perspective, and remember you can use the tips from the previous part of the video or this other video here to really figure out what is the best deck list and how you're going to tackle that current meta. We see deck lists and behaviors change around certain archetypes as the meta progresses, but always make sure to check out recent tournament toppings to see how effective your cards really are going to be. The rise and fall of the expectations with branded and Kashtira, the 2 powerhouses of this meta, have really shown that the meta is a free-fall. That's why I always like to consider all the archetypes in the format and whether the cards they have at the moment are still powerful enough, or maybe that specific strategy is actually what you need to win the game. And we can see that with, simple cards like the Gimme Puppet Nightmare, which is a Gimmick Puppet archetype card, but being used in branded as an amazing floodgate, or the Vanity cards now being used in Sprite because you don't use a normal summon in Sprite Runic, for example, and sometimes just win the game outright because of of it, another consideration which is so important is the game 2 and game 3 post-siding, which arguably is even more important than the blind game 1. What cards do you lose to, or what cards you know are really good in your archetype? Because some decks don't even have a hand presence after their combo, not all decks run this powerful side deck card. Triple Tactics Thrust is a really good option, a really good staple, and a generic good card because it can search for any normal spell or normal trap card in the game with Feather Duster, Dark Ruler, and Evenly combo to secure you the game. You could consider the Cross-Out Designator as the perfect side deck card, so that's why it's important to not always net deck, but consider the actual cards in your deck list and do a holistic view of what works and what doesn't, and hopefully that's going to get you to the best recipe for your deck list. Okay guys, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's when you play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe you're going second and your opponent has maybe 5 cards in their back row. Cross off every interaction that should have happened that didn't happen. For example, if I normal summon a monster like Full of Albaz and they don't summon Judgment in it, that means some Judgment is not on the field. You can study the most popular decks in the game at the moment and then figure out what cards they play in them. What I like to do is when the opponent is doing their first turn combo, they have 2 to 3 cards face down. I usually always like to assume there is a impermanence there. I don't know about you guys, but once I figure that out, it's really easy to play the game because you know every interaction and where it's coming from. You can use tournament reports from MCO 40, for example, that really break down the deck list, the side deck, the main deck cards that are trending at the moment. You can now expect Ghost Spell to hit your branded explosion, so maybe you have to make sure you search the Macaria to beat that, or you can have something like Call by the Grave to hit the Ghost Spell. And that's why I think it's important to always consider what's happening in the current meta, what might happen in the future meta with the OCG, what are the interactions that are going to be the most popular to save your deck. Something really funny is when you declare the search for an adventure monster and they hesitate, that usually is a tell that they have the Ash Blossom. So always pick up on those little signs, those micro signs that tell you that, you know, maybe the opponent is holding a hand trap. Not everyone is the best at hiding it. What I find interesting is if you develop this interaction even more, you could even start to think about how they already have board breakers in their hand, so they don't care about the Griffin search. So you might want to change your strategy depending on that, and to get really deep and analytical about it. If you play the same opponent multiple times, you can actually start to tell when they're calling a bluff. And I think that's a really advanced tip that people probably don't know. It's actually good to figure out what the body language is for your opponent, start to really figure out what the opponent has behind them. And you can use that Millennium Eye that Pegasus has. Quickly following up from that, and I find this really funny, is when Castillo Rise Out bunches 3 cards from the top of the opponent's deck face down. If they're a branded player and they make a huge reaction, you already know you've hit the Brand Diffusion or Albaz, and that's probably a good sign for you as a Castillo player. And that's why I think it's really important as a player to really consider how you react when things happen. So just as you would pick off patterns and behaviors with your opponent, you should also do the same thing with yourself. Another micro analysis you could use is when you know where your opponent prefers to activate the spell and trap, you can actually hit them with an imperm in the same color. But it's also careful to consider where your cards are placed and how to place them. I think if you master these, you're going to become the ultimate duelist, and that's what we all want. And that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.